We made this.
Welcome to the Japan on Film podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and welcoming back today two guests who it's been a while since you guys have been on, and that is Michael Hale and Konner Hudson of the KMP Podcast. How you guys doing?
Awesome. How are you, Perry?
I'm doing pretty good. Mike, how about you? How are you doing over there?
Pretty good. I mean, it's Akira time, so it's always
Akira.
It's always fun.
Akira.
Yeah, we are going to be talking about Akira today, but before we do that, last time you guys were on, I don't think we actually did an introduction for you guys, since I was basically on your show and we just used the audio for my show. So Why don't you tell people a little bit about yourselves?
I mean,
no, I refuse.
We are very amateur hobbyist podcasters. We wound up working. We've known each other for a very long time, but we wound up liking content like Castle Super Beast, and then later your kind of content. And so we just sort of imitated what we heard other people making, and so we just kind of just started kicking around a podcast for fun. We have a website. It's just the kmpodcast.com, but to be honest, we haven't updated it in a very long time. We're mostly just happy jumping into other people's streams or experimenting with stuff on our own. Konner, how would you add to our relationship?
I don't know. The podcast came out of the fact that we were always talking about stuff, and we wanted to talk about that stuff with other people. And then it just kind of grew from there. We never got an audience, but we had fun, and we've been off and on sabbatical for the last year just due to life. But popular culture, nerd stuff, Japan on film, it's all connected in a great circle of weeb.
So that actually leads into the next question. How did you guys get interested in Japanese movies, or in your case, I guess anime, since that tends to be more of a focus of what you guys talk about on your show?
Golly,
tell us the lore, Michael.
No, you can go first on this one. I will.
Let's see. So, okay, anime in general, that started. I was right around. I was at a Bible camp, and someone showed me a picture of Dragon Ball Z, and I was like, "What is this?" And then my parents saw it and were like, "That looks demonic," and I was like, "Sign me up." That was the origin story for me, for comedic effect. And then from there, it was like, just, oh, this actually is stuff that comes from Japan. It's not like the Nickelodeon Cartoon Network shows that you see. And then just learning how to Google as a young adult, being like, oh, there are other people who are really interested into this too, which is how I've discovered this movie that we're talking about today.
Michael,
my mother would actually unintentionally blame my anime interest on the fact that there was a old 80s Christian financed anime called Superbook and Flying House.
My gosh, Superbook.
The deepest dark lore.
Superbook.
Oh God. And I remember really liking it, and she was sort of like, oh, okay, well, I guess this kind of stuff is fine. And then I discovered Dragon Ball, the original Dragon Ball, on at 6 a.m. on Sundays before it would air, before any normal human should really ever be up, before we would go to church. And then from there, it just kind of slowly turned into, oh, now there's Sailor Moon. Oh, now there's the long. And Akira actually was one of the earliest things. I mean, it's a lot of people within our age range. It's like Akira, Ninja Scroll, Dragon Ball, Sailor Moon. That's kind of the square that connects lots of dots for lots of people. And so it was pretty much the same for me. And then I was very fortunate to work for an anime company called ADV Films for a little while. And being involved in that was it's just like pouring gasoline on an already lit flame. And then everything from there was just doubling down more and more on, ooh, this is cool. Ooh, I like this. Et cetera, et cetera.
I remember ADV. I had no idea you'd work for them. What did you do for them?
Okay, so I went to high school with one of the children of one of ADV's three founders. There was Mark Ledford, there was Matt Greenfield, and there was David Williams. And David Williams' son went to high school with me, and we had mutual friends. And I was very fortunate that pretty much almost not too long after I graduated high school, Janice Williams, his mother, who was the DVD producing coordinator, literally was like, "So, heard you want a job. Would you like to work for us?" And the sum total of my job's experience was taking the Japanese scripts that they had physical versions of that were sent to them, along with any rights that they got to any content. So they'd have to have the original raw script to be translated by their translators. I took those scripts, unstapled them, and fed them into a scanner that then allowed digitization. And I did whatever else Janice wanted. And then in that time, I got to Tiffany Grant, the English voice actress for Asuka, gave me my first summer job because she was also very kind and came to our high school as part of just a nice thing to do. And she gave me a summer job. And so just getting to be friendly and meet a lot of the voice actors, again, Gasoline Fire just made the connection to that kind of material just a million times. But long story short, my job was whatever I was required to do. They pointed and said, "Go do this." And I went, "Okie dokie." And then within a year or two, ADV
The
got
most
too big.
enthusiastic intern ever.
No, actually, I was that unfortunate. That was a very, I'm sure many people in hindsight would look back and go, I could have done a much better job at that job. And that was definitely high on my list of, I could have done a much better job at that job at that age when I was like 20, 21. And then ADV had the whole thing where it had New Type magazine. It got a little too big. It had like 3 different buildings. It got a little too big. It folded, and then they restructured into Sentai Filmworks. And so I was there during the golden age before the first collapse. And so, but all those wonderful people are very kind, and they were very, very nice to hire a very young 20-something person like me and be like, "Hey, go film this thing," or not film this thing, go handle these scripts. And I went, "Okay." And I just enthusiastically bounced around and did whatever it is I was required to do.
Nice. All right, so today we are talking about Akira, 1988 film, directed by Katsuhiro Otomo, who also did the manga, which is really interesting because like I was doing some research on it the other night and just seeing how long the manga is in comparison to the anime, and just reading about how I think one reviewer described it as it's more of a companion piece to the manga as opposed to an adaptation, just because there's so much stuff they have to leave out. So that's what we're talking about today. And what's your guys' history with this movie? I think Michael, you had mentioned that you had seen it along with like Dragon Ball Z and all that when you were young. So Konner, what about you? When was your first exposure to Akira?
Oh gosh. When I alongside the origin story, when I was in college, I started to just really dig into like the actual community, not in any like participatory way besides just consuming the content that was provided. So there was a couple podcasts that I was listening to that were quote unquote old time anime fans from the 80s. And so Akira was always held up as one of these original from Japan, original creator, very unique style, not like other shows that were coming out at the time that were the traditional like anime Dragon Ball Z shonen stuff. And so naturally, as an impressionable quote unquote punk anime fan, I was like, yeah, this is the original. This is the real stuff. Look at the blood. These adults and kids, they don't know what right is. That's the truth.
Michael, what was your origin story with this?
Actually, I in my youth, Akira was one of these things that I recall. Like I said, Ninja Scroll, Akira those were among the two earliest feature length kind of film things that I remember seeing that were very, very beautiful to look at in terms of their animation. But I had a very difficult time with Akira because, and I'm going to eat my own hat here, because I was initially having this whole thing in my head about how much I love the technicality of the movie. I'm just not the biggest fan of the character designs, but I will be darned if going through doing some research for some of this, I have much better respect for how it was made and what it was contrasting against. But when I was younger, I could not finish Akira. The designs the faces just got to me. So I remember renting Akira from a Hollywood Video, I think no less than 3 times. And each time I wouldn't even be able to make it all the way through. I was just a very pretentious, like, this isn't, it's so beautiful, but there are better things. And then and over the years, each time I go back to it, I like it more and more and more and more. But no, I just remember it was one of the only, I mean, aside from your standard terrible OVA hentai garbage that sometimes video stores would get, not really knowing what it was. Wicked City, which, hey, that's got beautiful production value too, though. But it was just definitely one of those early things that if you didn't have a lot of options, it was there. And I kept looking at it and then putting it back on the shelf, and then there'd be things like Iria or Zerum or other things that were like, oh man, this is much better. And in hindsight, I'm like, what was I thinking? That was a stupid opinion to have. So it's been with me for a very long time on my anime journey. I just appreciate it. It's probably like at the peak appreciation that I can have for it now. So it's like a sibling you've grown up with and you thought it was annoying at first, and then you're like, oh, you're actually pretty cool.
So I had first stumbled on this, I think when I was in junior high, when I was in 8th grade. I had one of my friends he was a huge fan of anime, manga, Japanese video games, all that. So he was kind of like my introduction into this world, and he'd always had like all these different manga and anime t-shirts. So he'd have like an Akira t-shirt and everything. So I'd always known about it, but he was the one who introduced me to Dragon Ball Z. And then I don't think it was until I was in maybe like a year later when I was in high school that I finally actually watched it. I think I rented it from Blockbuster or something like that. And I think I remember just not understanding it when first time I saw it. Kind of like with Ghost in the Shell. Like I watched it, I'm like, oh, okay. I don't know what that was, but I think I liked it.
What the existential, like, psychic underlayer of the universe didn't immediately become apparent?
No, I was not really prepared for it at that time.
But nuclear warfare metaphors.
Yeah,
very dense ones.
No, none of the stuff that now I look at after everything I've learned, and now I'm like, oh, okay, I see that, I recognize that. But back then, I'm just like, I don't know what's going on here. But there's a lot of blood, and I think, and that bike is really cool, and that was
motorcycles.
Thing I thought, yeah.
Yes, I love Akira, like as the deep intellectual place that the manga narrative comes from. Like the representative of like all of these different things from Japan society. But like the thing that grabs me is that 8-year-old kid, like, oh my gosh, these kids are so dope and they have all these powers. Even if you don't get the psychic powers, which, the guy kind of explodes at the end, you still have the cool kid who gets the girl and also has a giant laser gun. Lasers.
Both in space and on your shoulder.
Exactly.
I remember that bike, though. I loved the bike. In fact, when I was in high school, I was working at a comic book store. And at this point, some company, I can't remember who it was, they released a line of like Akira figures. And I think it was just like 3 figures. It was Kaneda, it was Tetsuo, and it was Kaneda's bike as a separate thing. Only thing I bought was Kaneda's bike. That was the only thing I cared about.
That bike, when I was still living in Japan, you'd see it everywhere. Like just in any hobby shop, be like, oh, here it is, and it's $500. You want it, don't you? Yes. Yes. I will settle for the jacket.
Did you buy the jacket?
No.
So now I have not read the manga. Have you guys read the manga?
Yes, I was able to do so.
I have not. I did a comparative video essay before I came on here, so at least know what the surface differences were, so I can speak to them at least.
Okay, so you did more research than even I did for this, because I didn't even do that much. I was trying to look for the manga on. It's my show. You guys have to do the research.
Yeah, well, but, Michael's actually written an article about it.
He actually read the manga, he said, too. So he's more up than we are. But I had actually tried looking for it while I was watching the movie. I'm like, you know what? I wonder if it's on Comixology, because I know they were having a Kodansha sale recently, and I know they're the ones who have the rights. There's no digital version. It's only available in print. And like the print versions are like, about like $35 on Amazon Japan for each, and it's 6 volumes. So I'm just like, no, I think I'll pass for now.
Each volume is so big. It's like a phone book. Like if you see everything stacked on top of each other, like at Barnes and Noble when I was younger, very young, it would always be, there'd be all these small little manga volumes, and then there would just be the one big phone book of Akira, and be like, oh man, this looks so cool. Oh, that's like $40.
Yeah, and the soundtrack. One book.
Yeah.
and the soundtrack plays in the background when you look up to it, and Zah.
Oh man, I found out some really cool stuff about that music actually.
It's so good.
This. It's so Bali. It's music from Bali, which is so genuinely exciting to find out about.
All right, so let's jump into the movie discussion then. What are some things that kind of really kind of grabbed you this time around?
Konner, I feel like because you had initially pitched this, I feel like there had to have been something that, I mean, Akira's, I think, been a thing that you've liked vocally for quite a while. I've just always been a little, because I've actually never asked you, what is it about Akira? Because there's been lots of things we've talked about covering even on our content before, and this has actually been brought up a few times. What is it that you've always liked about it? I like Akira from a technical perspective, but I've always been curious, what about it has grabbed your inner spirit?
Oh, okay.
Aside from lasers and bicycles.
Yeah. Aside from my tongue-in-cheek, very, very earnest appreciation of things that explode and are hyper-violent. The Akira movie had always had this like just incredible negative capability to bring out my old favorite literary term. And if you look into how it differs from the manga, it's like, oh yeah, okay, of course, this is the way he chose to tell the story in this limited block of time, because you can't fit the whole thing in there. So it's touching on enough of this Esper storytelling that was very popular in the 80s, from what I understand, like that just somehow it worked itself into a lot of different shows at the time. I think before or around the anime bubble was before it was bursting or as it was building. And so it's got this whole like humanity's collective evolution, and then it's got this very grounded struggle and a just very emotional battle of what society has done to these kids. And also these kids are assholes because they are. But then it like poses this just larger conflict between the revolutionaries, the government, the bureaucrats, and I mean, and there's like internal conflicts going within those overarching conflicts, and it just meshes into this very complex tapestry that is all focused.
The real psychic struggle is capitalism, my friend.
Well, I mean, in the dub I watched last night, one of the lines that the colonel says is, "You're just being tricked by capitalists," and I'm like, okay, cool. Thanks, Akira. Thanks, Otomo. I appreciate it. But what was I saying? Oh, and then it's focused in on this very real conflict between two kids who don't know where they're headed in terms of growing up. Like, and then that's just for me as a young man, or who used to be a young man, That just that continues to resonate to this day.
Michael, how about you? What are some things that jump out to you rewatching this? Because I know you said you're not the biggest fan of the story, but you
Well, I
appreciate
mean,
some of the technical
gosh,
aspects.
this is now probably my fourth jump back into both Akira the movie and Akira the manga. And each time I do more research into it, and I don't know if there's a term for enjoying the scholarly journey that a thing takes you on more than the thing itself. Akira is this really exciting little bubble of everything that launches what we would kind of understand is like the Japanese cyberpunk trend and all the stuff that goes into that, the construction of the Tokyo Olympic Stadium, the introduction of all these large, the three ring, oh my god, I had all the tabs open, I had to close. Tokyo has it's like, I believe it's like an interlocking three ring like freeway system. I want to say it was something that was involving three rings. It's been under construction for like 40 years, and it's just this very persistent story. That's one of the things that I said was it was a story written in the 80s about Japan's future in the 2019s, viewed now in the 2024s, about the sins committed in the 1940s. And it's just this amazing little puzzle box of so many different overlayered pieces of history, and each thing informs every other piece of it, that it's just this really cool puzzle. And I love learning about it. And even if the movie is a far inferior creation to the manga for the story, it's such a wonderful technical creation that is so like lots of other animes don't do half the things that this movie does. And I'm still even this morning getting ready for doing some prep work for stuff. I completely didn't realize that it's just a thing I didn't even think about, that the movie's so well made that they actually had normally anime is done where the voice actors do all their material post animation. And this was the reverse. They actually wanted their expressions to be so captured so perfectly that they hired new actors who had not done very much. And by the way, credit to that knowledge, because I got that from Cinema Tyler. Tyler spelled Tyler. He has like three little 15-minute documentaries about Akira. They're just amazing and very, very well made. So I've appreciated each time I go back into the movie, I learned something new about how unique and wonderful it is as a creation. Even if I would look at the story and go, the book was better, and I shake a cane like an old person, even though I'm not old. So I've just genuinely loved looking back at this piece of art and how it was made, and learning more stuff about it, and figuring out more layers to the puzzle box that is this movie. Even if I would still tell anyone, but you want to know the real story, go read the books if you can find them, which then is probably very annoying to anyone who
there's a copy of the first volume and the third volume at every Barnes and Noble across America.
That's it. Just those two.
You can't find any others. And they're all $50.
Yep.
Never on sale.
I was going to say, there's going to be a sale. There's always like a sale on the full set, and you see it like, oh man, the whole thing, $60. Oh, maybe think I'd be happier with the $60.
How about you, Perry?
I am, speaking on that, I'm because there's been talks about doing a live action version of it. I think Keanu Reeves was attached at one point to a live action adaptation of this. I want it to happen just because that means that these books will probably end up in digital form, and that means they can go on sale at some point.
Yep. You're right.
Man.
That would be the one saving grace of any sort of adaptation that bastardized adaptation is that it will get the books on sale for once.
Actually, you're right, because Alita was really easy to come by legitimately when that movie was in production and leading up to its release.
Yeah, I think I got Alita for like $5 at a Comixology sale or something like that. But
I think I read it for free on the Amazon Prime. Anyway.
Yeah, I think it was on there too, probably. One of the things that I'm watching, thinking about this, is that it's wild that the manga was started in 1982. This film came out in 1988 while the manga was still in production. So like the second half of the manga came out after this movie was released, which really makes me curious to go back and read the manga just to see how different the story is in the second half. But but even still, like you're talking about it's set in this world where it's after after World War III.
Mm.
You've got the return of these biker gangs from that you saw a lot in the post-war era, and you've got the Japanese self-defense force is basically remilitarized, right? You've got a remilitarized Japan, disenfranchised youth, and I'm looking at what's happening in Japan now, and I'm just like,
Yup.
This is. I'm not liking the parallels. Basically, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, like
No,
the movie was projecting 2019, right? And the manga set in 2030. So it's like, well, we missed the opportunity for Akira in real world, but we are hoping for a manga story in the other timelines.
Well, I believe it's set in a 2019 where the Tokyo 2030 Olympics are eventually, because obviously countries get their rights to the Olympics very far ahead. And so they're building the stadium. And again, full credit to Cinema Tyler for the really, really good documentary, where he pointed out that during the 2020 Olympics, when they got postponed to 2021 because of COVID, there was graffiti. So in the movie, in the Akira movie, there is this idea that obviously, just like any real issue going on with Olympic stadiums in countries where they are made, that is not always a good thing. And that has a lot to do with the 1964 Olympics for Japan as well. But they had this graffiti, which was like, just cancel it, spray painted on the walls outside the still being built stadium in Akira. And so during COVID, someone actually recreated the graffiti and the funky looking, like dilapidated, like garbage board with stuff sprayed all over it. They put that in front of the stadium in 2020 while they were postponing it to 2021. And it's like, just cancel it. No, it's definitely, absolutely, it's the parallels. It's a mirror that focuses back on itself, and it's a loop that keeps on looping.
Good. It's awesome.
Yeah, I thought about the Olympics too, especially when you were saying that, because that was a big debate, and even before COVID, a lot of people were saying, for good reason, because I think almost every time the Olympics has come to a city, it's destroyed that city. It's just a complete waste of funds, and just completely devastates the local economy and puts the cities in debt. And I don't know why we keep going on with this bullshit about all these cities falling over themselves to compete for it.
I follow this one account called Liminal Spaces on Twitter, and it'll just post just weird abandoned structures, very, very scenic. And one of them was I can't remember what country, but it was just an abandoned Olympic stadium that had been created for one use and then abandoned afterwards.
Yeah, I think they're called pink elephants or something like that. I think there's one in Greece is probably the one you might be talking about. It's always the case, and the same thing with they're pouring all this money into the Olympics. And I remember thought it was telling at the time, because before, when the Olympics were still scheduled to happen, Shinzo Abe kept saying, "Oh, COVID's not a problem. COVID's not a problem. It's not a big deal in Japan. We don't have that problem here." And then the Olympics were canceled, and like the day after, he's like, "Yeah, actually, COVID's kind of a
problem." Oh goodness. And even the stadium itself, I mean, the Olympics in the 60s were such a, astronomical piece of Japan's reintroduction into the world society after World War II. Like, they already have had such a conflicted, the Olympics in Japan have such a strong history that obviously the fact that the movie is like, nah, this big, great Olympic stadium, what's underneath it? The remains of a murdered orphan child.
Who also exploded.
Did you do anything to that child? We may have dissected it. Whoopsie doodle. Like, there's these symbols of, no, it's great, everything's fine, nothing's wrong with our country, we didn't do anything. What's buried under there? Nothing. Nothing at all. Please ignore that. We didn't do anything wrong. Everything. It's just the symbolism is like, it's stacked on top of itself. It's just so wild. This movie's great.
Yeah. Something about the Olympics that I just want to mention too is I remember reading one story where a woman had been kicked out of her apartment for the 1964 Olympics,
And it happened again.
It happened again.
It happened again.
And she's like, I can't believe this shit is happening again.
Yes. And I mean, the laughter is obviously to distract from how horrible that is. And in Akira, right? That's the whole the notion of, and I know the term gets thrown around a lot, like cyberpunk. What's that mean? It was always the idea that no, progress is not always a good thing. You can keep progressing and you can upload your brain into a digital body and have cyber prosthetics. Poor gonna be poor, rich gonna be rich, rich gonna get richer. And that same idea, like, is just like plastered everywhere in the movie, that there are still people who can barely afford anything. There's still like the super rich, and now there's just the super poor. But hey, you got cool lights on your bikes now, though. The future's here, baby. And it's just,
you got to steal your own though if you really want to.
And exactly, Konner, like what you mentioned, the disenfranchised, these kids, like, it's just a callback to the disenfranchised youth of Japan's post-war period, when it's like, well, why do you have all these gangs? Well, funny enough, after a war, guess what happens if you're a conquered country that is under occupation and jobs are curtailed and it's hard to find jobs? You're gonna, I believe it's called the Bozozoku gang. Like, you're gonna find, you're gonna make your own justice. You're gonna be like, hey, world doesn't want me. Screw them. I'm gonna form a pompadour biker gang with my friends, and
or
find
clowns. Can't. I wish to seize the means of production.
Oh gosh, it's just.
I would just ride my cool motorcycle and brain kids at 80 miles an hour or whatever, the 500 RPMs. That opening scene is so good in terms of world building and showing the setting through an action scene that almost seems superfluous, and also the cool effect of the lights trailing behind to show speed and weight of the bikes. But like, you start out at their little hideout, start the jukebox soundtrack, and then the cacophonous sound music, background music starts going, and then these kids are essentially braining adults from what we can tell. But in the background, we're going from a very electric New Tokyo, and then we end up in a dilapidated, I don't know if that's the scene where they're building the unfinished stuff, but they just end up in a ruins.
Yeah. No, the opening of the manga is this stretch of interstate that is just crumbling and just destroyed, and it's a wasteland. And then in the distance, you see this beautiful, shining, rebuilt city, but you can see the rest of the infrastructure that fell away. And it's like, the higher and more cool, the more Blade Runner the city looks, like the more beneath it is like crumbling and grimy and just freaking disgusting. And like the bars that you go into look like where some of these kind of gangsters kind of meet. It looks like anything out of, like, I don't want to say a Western, but it's just so almost primitive and primeval that is just so not what you would expect from a cyberpunk future. But it's got that real cool CD changer. When you put the radio on the jukebox, it looks so great. But man, that place is probably a dive. It's just that really cool juxtaposition of, it's the future, it's here today, it's so shiny, look at all the lights. Oh, but it's also piss on the floor everywhere and cigarettes everywhere, and it's nasty.
That idea of the crumbling infrastructure around, where you've got Neo Tokyo is the gleaming city in the distance. It's not a one-to-one comparison, but it is very similar to what Japan has been struggling with for like the past few decades now, is the urban concentration and these small rural areas becoming, essentially abandoned and deserted. I mean, I see this all the time, right? I live in a suburban type area and lots of rural places around here, and there are just houses that have just completely gone to ruin because the people who live there, they either died or they're in a nursing home now, and the people who and their descendants, they live in like Tokyo or Osaka or somewhere, and they don't want to bother with the place, so it just goes to rack and ruin. And now the government's trying to figure out, what do we do with all of these places, because one of the interesting things about Japanese real estate is real estate doesn't appreciate in value here. Like, once you buy a house, it's going to drop in value almost as soon as you buy it. and it's the land that's more valuable. So what's very common is people will buy a house, they'll demolish the house, and they'll just build a new house on it. That happens very frequently here. I'm seeing a lot of parallels with that, with these areas outside of Tokyo, just going to decay, and then meanwhile all the resources are devoted to the big shiny metropolis instead.
With all the holographic ads, and it's almost, I mean, it's kind of the analogy like, oh, the future is up. It's like, but what about where you live? You just want to climb that ladder.
I think I remember like a few seasons ago, there was an anime that was specifically made by either a government like project to get people interested in living in more rural areas. I can't remember what it's called though, but it looked cute and cozy.
Yeah, the government has been trying a bunch of things, but it's such a half-assed effort, because it's like, well, what we really need is you got to start pushing companies to do remote work. Because I talk to my students all the time. I teach university out here, and a lot of my students come from this area, or they come from other rural areas, and I usually ask them, when you graduate, where would you prefer to live? Would you want to live in like Tokyo or Osaka, or would you want to go back to your rural hometown? And they're like, oh, well, I would love to stay in the hometown, but I can't because all the jobs are in Tokyo and Osaka. So you've got this. It's the same thing with the declining birth rate. The government knows what needs to be done. It knows it needs to increase immigration. It knows it needs to give more benefits and incentives for families. It knows that it needs to end the insane work culture here, but they're not willing to do it. And it's the same thing with the depopulating rural areas too.
So did anyone?
Yeah, I'd rather be a street tough. I'd rather be a street tough motorcycle kid too. Might get a laser gun or psychic powers.
Well, I mean, the find your family wherever your family is going to be. If you're going to have to, make your own family. I mean, that is unfortunately or not, that is the incentive with gangs, and that actually is the problem with like Tetsuo and Kaneda and their relationship is they're orphans. They don't have families. It is this law. I think it was kind of a way of basically recreating issues with the law, like a kind of lost generation sort of thing, and being like, here's the kids that are left behind. Well, if adults aren't going to be their supporting catalyst for relationships, they're going to have to make it themselves. And that's got
howdy, the trauma.
Boy, howdy, the inferiority complex on one of these kids. And what it kind of shows is making relationships is hard. And sometimes it's even in their gang, like, it's just so difficult to feel accepted. And I think, Konner, just to piggyback off what you were saying, there's obviously the psychic struggle between, how these kind of powers how these powers kind of manifest. But the other bigger issue is if you don't have a society that takes care of your kids, like, man, what are you doing? Like, I mean, you're
making jokers.
Question. Yeah,
it's the Joker either that rides the motorcycle, or it's the Joker that turns into a giant amoeba.
Ugh, yeah.
I think something you said at the beginning about Akira really, really catalyzed something that I've been chewing on since I rewatched the movie, and it was the puzzle box metaphor you used. And I think if I'm going to keep that metaphor going before it falls apart, the thing that unlocks the puzzle box for me is like, this movie is different layers or explorations of very specific societal wish fulfillments from different characters. So the male characters that I was thinking about was the Colonel. Wish fulfillment for him is he is the military man who does the right thing with the shit he's been given, and which in his case is a coup, but he also gets to take care of those kids. And even in the English dub, all of his, as stern and like unemotional as he is, there's like this weird tenderness that he has towards the aging babies, the Benjamin Button kids, like, and even towards Tetsuo, like he's like, hey, calm down, son. And the son's like, you can't tell me you're not my dad, which directs me to the wish fulfillment that Tetsuo is that revolutionary, like, as soon as I get power, I am challenging everyone and no one will stop me. Like, that's a wish fulfillment and a half, even though he gets absorbed by the psychic layer underneath the universe.
Yeah.
And then Canada, who is just happy-go-lucky, the Artful Dodger archetype, who is just like, I just said, do what I want, man.
I don't want
chaotic
no
good. Yeah, I got this laser. Punched you in the face, idiot. I love you though.
I love you, bro.
Just
don't try to conquer anybody, bro. Why are you trying to conquer everybody? Stop, bro. Stop.
And then those are the three. The trifecta helps unlock the puzzle box Otomo gave us in this movie, I think.
I want to go back to the orphan stuff because I think there's a lot in there too, and because we saw this happen in the post-war era, like you said, right? A lot of these kids coming, some of them coming back from war and being disenfranchised. Some of them who weren't old enough to serve in the war and becoming disenfranchised afterwards. And so, some of those former soldiers ended up joining the Yakuza. Some of those, kids ended up joining biker gangs. And there's a lot of orphans too, right? A lot of families who had died in the bombings. You also had, as a result of the occupation, a lot of mixed race children who ended up being abandoned or sometimes even murdered brutally. There's some really horrific stories out of that time period if anyone wants more information about that. But also, and you're seeing a lot of that kind of stuff, not in the exact same way, but a lot of that happening today too, with people feeling lost and disenfranchised with the way the system has been working. I mean, that's why you have the problem of the hikikomori, right? The shut-ins who don't want to go into school, don't want to go to work. Even kids who graduate, they're turning down. Like there are more jobs in Japan than there are people to fill them, but an increasing number of the young generation, they don't want to go into the typical salaryman employment route because it's a dead end and they don't want that. So instead they're going into low paying hourly work instead because maybe they don't make as much money, but it offers more freedom and flexibility.
That makes sense. If a Gretsuko has taught me anything, it's that you don't want to be an accountant in a furry Japan world.
You're not wrong. I mean, especially accountants actually don't make a lot of money out here.
The poor red panda.
Well, there is. I'm not meaning to point that any movie is always going or should always be implied to have a pseudo historical kind of parallel. I don't think every movie is all the time going to be, it's an echo of history and history repeats, and so every movie
it's a poetry.
It rhymes. But there are two endings to the Akira manga, and the movie is essentially, it kind of got to a certain point where everything is pretty much in parallel with the manga, and then it just kind of fast forwards to the end and goes, I guess it's over now. There is this very, I guess if anyone needs a bit of a warning, brief spoiler in 3, 2, 1. The larger plot in Akira is that Tetsuo becomes consumed with his power and decides that he is actually good. Now, in the manga, there is an Akira. There is a little boy who is Akira. He is an actual tangible character that Tetsuo basically puppets around as his figurehead by being saying, look, I have Akira. He supports me. We are going to now create the Great Tokyo Empire, and we are going to curb stomp all the other nations that made Japan what it is. And it becomes this international plot about he creates this pseudo government, and the rest of the world is like, oh, that's bad. We should maybe stop this. To which the obvious ending is, well, the Tetsuo and Kaneda are stopped. Tetsuo and Akira are stopped, but the rest of the world is still not quite up to date on that they were stopped. And so this foreign kind of group of America, I think it's like Americans, French, German, like your classical Western countries, like they show up to basically liberate Japan. And one of the endings is pretty much that that's not really a bad thing, that this is all kind of ambiguous, that whatever happens to Tokyo, it's its own future to kind of bring it back. There is another ending, though, where Kaneda basically sees these people showing up to air quotes, liberate Japan, and kind of says, nah, Tetsuo may have had the wrong way to go about making the Great Tokyo Empire, but the Great Tokyo Empire is not a bad idea. And we don't need any of these foreigners coming in here and making our lives a wreck. Go on, get
off the property. I got a laser.
And that tension between, and I think that's a real big issue, and it kind of gets back even to the idea of the orphan kind of metaphor, the puzzle box metaphors. What does Japan want to be in the future? And there's these very conflicting ideas, even with the author himself being like, man, maybe we would do kind of okay on our own. Maybe we don't need anyone's help. Maybe we do. I think that's a really tough thing for the manga to try to reconcile, and it kind of couldn't. And then when he had this, there's a documentary where they're interviewing him, and I think it's like the 90s, about the manga. And he said, well, while I was making the movie, I kept looking back at the manga and being like, maybe I made some mistakes with the ending. Maybe I did everything wrong. Maybe this ending is better. And is just this very conflicted artist trying to say the right thing at the end of a very poignant story about what should our country be? And I think that it's really rough having 3 endings, a movie version, 2 manga endings, and I don't actually know if he's happy with any of them. And I think that's the problem with this kind of art, where you're projecting onto, nuclear war and rebuilding and orphans, and what are you going to do and where are we going to go? And I think that makes the movie really rough, because the movie ending it's just kind of just ends like, and then he was absorbed into the baby. The end. And even that ending is kind of rushed. And I just always feel like it's like, yeah, remember Imperial Japan? Wow, that was bad. Anyway, it's just over. Nothing. Everything's done now. We don't have to worry about it. Anyway, credits. Play us out, boys.
I mean, like, that's really good, Michael, because it's like, I don't know. I think about a line that was in the English dub. It was like, the colonel says, "It is not my job to think about what is right. It is my duty to act or not act." And I was like, what a man thing to say. And it's just so empty, like just empty military badassery. Like I don't know. When the colonel decides to do a coup and he's just like, kill him, I'm like, man, is it that easy? I don't know if that many soldiers who would just receive that order in today's world and just take it like that. But who am I? Who am I? But like, just that act or not act thing is exactly what, I mean, it's what he explores, and then each one does a different act.
I mean, I don't know if it's, I mean, again, shout out to the Cinema Tyler, because I do not agree with this point. They kind of wanted to make the point that Akira is more of a parallel, not for nuclear war, but for biological war, and the kind of biochemical war crimes that Japan committed in World War II. This was sort of more indicative of that more than nuclear weapons. I'm kind of like, nah, that's a big nuclear explosion at the start of that movie. I don't think you can get away from that one. But in the movie in some ways is horrifying, because at least in the manga, Akira is present. He's still there. He's actually alive. How his powers kind of work is he manipulating Tetsuo? Is Tetsuo manipulating him? It's kind of a weird question. No, in the movie, they vivisected and chopped apart that kid. And Akira is a corpse pile buried under an Indian graveyard of an Olympic stadium. Like, that presence of, the military at some point is like, or the scientists or who is like, we'll do it. We need answers. Yep. And I think the colonel in particular is having to bear the weight of knowing when you do those kinds of things. I don't know if some of it is like almost even reactive. Like when he mentioned, kill him. He's like, okay, because that's the training. And I think that paternal instinct to want to be something other than that, because when you're pointing out his attempts at kindness for other characters, I think it's got to suck being trapped in I have the capacity for kindness, but my job, gun clock, requires me to also kill. I think that's rough. And I think that's not just a Japanese movie sentiment. I think that's any country with a military sentiment is going to see that character and be like, whoa, you're partnered with a guy.
What a man.
What a man.
I love how much he hates the doctor.
So he's partnered with a dude who wants to keep carrying on these experiments that have only led to murdered children. And they've got a menagerie, the horrifying child rooms of trying to keep these kids in a childhood state when they've obviously been withered into mummies. I like the Benjamin Button thing that you said there. I think that was pretty unfortunate. That was really apt. They're like, oh, keep them as kids. Make them an adorable carnival playroom. What can they do? Oh, mess with your mind and rip apart your inner psyche. But why do you have them? Standard weapons tests. It's fine. It's fine. Like that.
What are we going to just let them join biker gangs? That seems to be working great for different kids.
No, I mean, the palpable dislike the colonel has for the institution that he is partnered with, and that they almost seem like I can't really tell if they're separate or the same, is actually troubling. That it's not a very clear line of does this kind of the bioweapon psychic weapon program, where does it fit in the military? Like, what's going on? Like, can the colonel actually really put a stop to it? He seems to hate the whole thing, but the scientists over here like, no, just give me like 5 more children. It'll be great. Look, just 5 more kids and we'll unlock the hidden secret. It's like, well, it's awful. This is awful.
There's a lot of stuff in there that I was thinking about that while you were going through that. One of the things about the 3 different endings and about creator's own kind of like conflicted feelings about which one is the right ending. God, that's so relevant today. That's so similar to what is happening in Japan. Like, what kind of country do we want to be? Because you do have factions who are like, let's go back to the imperial days because that worked out well for everybody. It's like, no. But then you've also got people who are like, well, let's just keep the post-war thing going. That worked for so well, even though it hasn't worked in like 30 years. But maybe it'll start working again magically. But then you've got other groups of people who are like, no, we actually have to rethink the way we're doing society. We have to rethink the top-down approach, the seniority system, the patriarchal system. All of that has to be rethought. And you've got all those different visions competing. So that it's very similar to what's happening today. But also what you were saying about how in the manga, Tetsuo is controlling Akira like his own puppet, whereas in the movie, Akira is vivisected and they've built this institution up around him. And how you even have people, talking about Akira, regular people, revering Akira. So it's so similar. It's that military, the fetishization of Imperial Japan. I think that even though it's a rotting corpse festering beneath.
Yep.
I mean, but people are still revering it as like the ultimate end goal, and you see so much of that stuff in this movie. And you're right; it doesn't necessarily make a judgment one way or the other. It's just kind of like, this is how it is, basically.
Well, even in the movie, I mean, when the colonel's like, look at what it really is. Look, take a good look. This is what we've been doing all this for. Oh my God. Like, I think it just reminds me of someone who at one point it was an article I read years ago that was like, yeah, pretty much Godzilla is just a metaphor for the imperial system and how it just destroys Tokyo. And no matter what Tokyo wants, Imperial's gonna mess him up. And again, that's a very easy, low-hanging fruit kind of metaphor to make. But damn, if it doesn't just click. And then even in the manga with the whole idea of, well, who's in charge? Like Tetsuo, if he's the military and Akira's the emperor, like, well, it's a symbiotic problem where each one is kind of giving support to the other. And the problem is you have them both. It doesn't matter they're both bad or they're both dangerous. And the fact that they're in league with each other is a danger to the rest of the world. Like, it's just damn, the metaphor doesn't work.
Also, coincidentally, yesterday I was on Twitter and someone had posted this video of one of the LDP politicians. Of course, it was the LDP talking on the floor of the Diet about how we need to bring back the education in that the emperor is literally descended from a god. I'm like, no, that's not what we need to do. But it's like this, it's still coming back 70 years later. It's insane.
It's just a thing, and I think, Konner, I've mentioned this to you before, but I have always been baffled by any person, particularly any Western person, who looks at anime in particular and goes, oh my gosh, look at all these great ideas. They're really just challenging authority. Oh my goodness, Japan just must be the most open-minded country of all time. They've got yaoi. Look how free-spirited they like, or stuff like that. And it's like, no, now
those are the artists.
Yes, and that's the when you're trying to push art out that can encapsulate what you feel. I think as someone who is still making your creation when you're still alive and you're still an adult, like him trying to make this story make sense when you're still growing and you're still watching generations every decade kind of change, and you're like, oh man, maybe I'm not the same person I was before. Like, it's rough being an artist. And Perry, I'm not sure if this is a thing you can answer, but I would really like to ask from your perspective, because I actually don't know enough about this as a Western person who does not live in Japan. I get the sense that Japan is very okay with very liberal art as long as it's just viewed as art. Like, you'd be like, hey, you can have the most anti-imperial sentiments you want, but you can't practice it in your real life. Am I reading that wrong? Like, I just get the feeling that people just understand, oh yeah, it's art, that's manga, that's comics, who cares? But don't espouse some of the stuff in real life or you're going to be in a lot of trouble, or at least your social life could run into issues about how well you'll conform and being around other people.
I think it's a little bit more complex than that, than a straight, yes or no type of thing. It's because I teach about a lot of anti-authoritarian, anti-imperial stuff, messages in my classes all the time, and I talk about them all the time. And and there are some of the higher ups at my school who are much more sympathetic to that kind of stuff, and they've never silenced me or anything like that. So.
And that's kind of what I feel. I don't think anyone would say, that's what I always got the impression of, is like, well, it's art. You can talk about art. You can watch art. Art is art. It is a necessary function of being a person. But if you were to take that particular anti-authority sentiment and then try to act on it and say, yeah, I do think the LDP is bad. Let's get rid of it. Whoa there, champ.
I think back up. It's hard to say because the people who are most likely to take those stances are also happen to be the most apathetic. Like, Japan has done a really good job of making their youth very apathetic. And
really?
I see this all the time when I talk to my students, because I talk about in my major university classes. One of the textbooks I use is written by a Westerner in Japan, and it's a series of essays that he wrote viewing Japan through a Western lens. And one of the things he talks about is politics and how he still pays attention to politics in America, and how he's surprised at how politics in Japan are so different, because it's just something that it's people don't talk about it at all. And when I ask my students about it, one of the questions I ask them is, youth turnout in Japan voter turnout is very low, and it's often been said that Japanese youth are very apathetic when it comes to politics. And I ask them what they think about it. Do they follow politics? Are they interested in it? If they do, why do they follow it? If they're not interested, why not? And most of them say, it's just like, there's no point. It doesn't matter because they don't listen to us anyway. And so I think it's hard. I think there is that sentiment in a lot of people, but they just don't feel they have any way to express it. And I think
biker gangs. Just join a biker gang. Bring them back. Like, I think that feeling alienated by your own political system it has to be. And obviously there's similar sentiments for different kinds of people in the United States as well. I would not be able to make a judgment in the way that I feel that you could. And I think you're, particularly because you teach film, I think that gives you a very unique insight into. And I would never phrase it as apathy. I was curious if it was maybe anxiety. like, oh, I really want to do something. Oh, but I can't. Like the desire is there, but I'm not sure if that makes me very sad if hopefully the apathy doesn't reach everybody. And I hope that
I think it's both. I think it's both apathy and anxiety. I think there are a lot. There are a lot of people who I do see a lot of students who are like, yeah, I really care. I think we should change things. I just don't know how. So I think there is a lot of that. And then there are others who have just completely checked out and they're like, it's no point. They don't listen to us anyway. There's nothing we can do to change it. And I try in some small part to try and disabuse them of that notion, but it's been beaten down to them since birth that they're basically, because they're young, nobody's going to listen to them. So I think that it's tough to overcome that kind of conditioning. Something else too, you mentioned about the perception people have of anime in the West, and I wanted to make a note of that too, because one of the things I see that drives me nuts is whenever people say American art is too political. Why can't it be more like Japanese art, which is not political at all? I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Are you kidding me? I mean, look at what we're talking about here with this. I mean, we're talking about how the whole thing is basically a metaphor of Japan being built on the rotting corpse of the empire. How is that not a political statement?
It's just, I mean, did you not see the laser? I'm pretty sure that laser is apolitical. Not the space laser that the government built and put into space. The one that the kid had. That's the apolitical one.
So many shonens. I mean, oh my god, so many are always, oh, I'm a young character learning to use my powers for good, and adults pat them on the head and go, yes, we believe in you. And the villain is always some from a previous generation that the adults fought and buried or locked away or something, and then that villain comes back and the kids are like, adults, why didn't you stop this? It's like, it's up to you. You're the future. You're going to fix our mistakes and put the villain back in the box. It's like, whoa. No, I mean, that's just, I don't know. While I find the midness of My Hero Academia very, very mid, that metaphor, we're like, wouldn't every adult know who this one villain is? Oh, you all knew who he was and you just never mentioned him ever because you thought once you defeated him, he was gone. And now he's back. And the young children, have to beat him. Like, it's just a very reoccurring artistic problem.
The nine-tailed beast that you planted inside me when I was a child.
Oh no! Oh yeah. I mean, the villain was a previous someone from an old. There's shonen. There's just
Naruto.
There's just villains and secret organizations from the past that everyone's like, oh, they've been defeated. Oh, they're gone. And then they show back up, and the younger kids are always, oh, we've got to fight these bad guys all the time, like clockwork. And it just baffles me that I know some manga is always made for fun and lots of animes. Not every anime does that. But the idea, if anyone ever thinks anime isn't political, oh my goodness. It's just...
Jesus, look no further than Miyazaki. I mean, Miyazaki is extremely political. I was just
yes,
right before we started recording, I actually recorded another episode about Castle in the Sky, and one of the things I talked about it in that episode, and I was talking about Miyazaki, and I said, Taro Yamamoto, who was in Battle Royale, and now he's a left-wing politician. He leads the Reiwa Shinsengumi party. He was often described in the Western press as the Japanese Bernie Sanders, and I'm like, actually, I think Hayao Miyazaki is more of the Japanese Bernie Sanders because he's this curmudgeonly old cynic who nonetheless has this very positive view of what people could do.
Yeah.
And I think that, and I'm like, and his stuff, politics are all over his work. But I'm even just thinking about this show. I mean, but we're like 60, 70 movies now we've talked about on this show. I can't think of one that I've talked about on the show that did not have some kind of a political message. Maybe Bloody Chainsaw Girl, I don't know, but even that, there might even be, there's tons of anti-authority stuff even in that too.
I mean, I don't think you can make movies. I mean, there's a very interesting Konner. How long ago did we do the Oshi Pat Labor? That was like a few months ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago. I would highly encourage, if you've never seen a Pat Labor movie, oh boy, it's great. Mamoru Oshii is
Pat Labor 2.
Pat Labor 2. Oh, anyway, it's so good. Oshii has recently a series of like video lectures that he's done, kind of like how BBC has the Maestro series. Oshii went on there and was basically venting about his creative process, and he was literally there's an untranslated book that he's made. I think it's called Memories or Methods. And that some people have been like, hey, look, if you're never going to translate this book, no one's ever going to translate it. So watch these videos instead. And part of his creative process, he's like, you can't make stuff without having seen other stuff. And he's like, where you live is where you're going to get your ideas from. He even uses this metaphor of, oh, I'm looking at a telephone pole. Well, while I'm looking at a telephone pole, I'm thinking there's a person there, and then there's a dog, and then I imagine the skyline. And he's like, my imagination's going to pull from what I already have access to. And he calls it his mental library, and that he pulls references from his library. And so he's going to imagine the skyline looking like Tokyo. And I think that you can't do art like a movie or a TV series or anything visual without pulling from your own frame of reference. And so that's why I think that by being alive is a political statement to countless people, and discrediting that or trying to be like, oh, Akira is a great movie. Like, I mean, look, Konner and I both, we appreciate
We've talked about it for an hour.
We talked about it for an hour. We appreciate laser beams and motorcycles and psychic espers, but yeah, there's also the
exploration of the complex character of man.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what's being a military man or not? Like, oh, there's those questions, but I think when you have a movie set in a contemporary time period where you have a literal revolution of the underclass going on in the background, being spearheaded by a pseudo-religious cult that's trying to be like, we're gonna bring back Akira and everything will be great. It's like, oof. I don't know how you can see that and not inadvertently be like, I wonder what things he experienced in his life that made him want to make those characters, make that scene where people are like, we want a better life. We're going to overthrow this corrupt, decadent government because we want a chance too. And they're being manipulated. Like,
well, also, when you mentioned yaoi, and that's another example of it. I remember when there was the big debate in America when they revealed that the John Kent Superman is bisexual, and people were saying like, "Why manga doesn't do this? They don't have this kind of bullshit." And I'm just like, and what I did was I was literally in a Japanese bookstore when I saw that on Twitter, and I looked up. There's a huge bookshelf. The label right on the top is Boys Love. It's just all yaoi fiction. It's like they got an entire section to this in Japanese bookstores, and you're saying manga doesn't do this stuff? Come on.
Boys Love is for girls, though.
That's did try and say that, yeah.
Yeah, even except for the Boys Love that's explicitly for men, but you know,
except for that,
yeah,
except for that whole thing.
What's a dojin, and how do I?
But anyway, we're running close to the end of time here. So, do you guys have any final things you wanted to say about Akira?
Yeah, you better like it. That's that one of the podcasts that got me into Akira. That was what their sign-off line was for their Akira podcast. They better freaking like it, Michael. Looking at you.
Look. Again, because I can't credit.
I'm kidding.
No, I mean, look, it's rough for me to come across seeming like a contrarian when I will acknowledge that I don't know what the word is for when, like, is this style of character design my taste? No, not in the slightest. But when someone else comes along and they give a really good perspective on like why they made it that way, I can't help but go, damn, that's a good sentiment. Not my thing, but that's a really good sentiment. And let me go back and find it again because I've gone and lost it. The YouTube series that I was Cinema Tyler, in part of the footage that they used, they were going over how they didn't want their character designs to look like what people were used to, and because they wanted to capture the mouth expressions perfectly, they tried to make everyone look as realistic as possible, including the women. And he was recorded saying like, everyone can draw cute girls, but it's harder to draw normal looking people, and then give them all distinction. And I just couldn't help but be like, damn, that's a really good point, and I had never thought about that. And I may not Akira the movie may be it is a beautiful technical masterpiece of like quality art with just amazing music. And just I cannot credit enough the fact that they invented new technology for how to do the creation of the movie. Like they scanned the black and white lines on a film camera. So before they colored it, they could go back through the movie and test the lip syncs and make sure that it looked good before they colored it so that it wouldn't waste money. And it's just that in of itself like baffled me. Like I did not think that was going on in the 80s. So I love what it is. I genuinely think it's a brilliant time capsule of one guy's attempt at trying to figure out, dude, where are we? What are we doing? Like, where are we going? I may just point people to the manga every single time and go, no, just read it. But I definitely think that you can't try to figure out Japanese cyberpunk or Japanese cinema or the impact that it has had without being able to go, no, but you really should see it once. Even at the end, you're like, it wasn't for me. Just watch it once and just give it a shot. I think that you're not gonna, even if you come away whistling the animation, then you're still gonna have like a really good time because it's so beautiful.
And the soundtrack.
Yeah, amazing soundtrack. Yeah, I'm kind of with you on a lot of that. I feel like the story is harder for me to enjoy just as a story, and I find myself paying more attention to these different ideas that are in. I think that's a big part because I haven't read the manga, and so I'm really curious to read the manga and kind of see how the story hangs together in that, and then to go back and watch this. So yeah, if anyone from Kodansha by any happenstance is listening to this, please put this manga out digitally so that more people can read it. Because I would love to go in and read it and kind of see how this all fits together. It's still a wonderful movie, though. It's still, like you said, it's a technical achievement. There is a lot of really cool ideas here, even if it feels a little incomplete in some ways, because, well, basically the story was incomplete when he was making this movie. But anyway, why don't you guys tell people where they can find your stuff?
So we have the website, which is just
KMP Podcasts at all your favorite podcasts hosted sites, but we're home on SoundCloud.
Yeah.
We have a YouTube too that we were trying to get off the ground.
I made a Nadia video essay and it was fun. It was a fun time. We're just dabblers, folks. But if you enjoy dabbling, invite us onto your content.
Actually, we were planning for March Mecha Madness in direct competition with March Madness of the ball games with the sports ball.
Okay, so this episode will probably be coming out in May, actually, so people can check that out then.
Oh,
yeah. Cross-pollinate.
People will be able to see if it actually did, if you guys finished it then.
No accountability.
Oh no! If it isn't the inevitable consequence of our own words.
Yeah.
All right, but anyway, guys, thank you so much for coming on. It was a lot of fun having you back on after a very long absence. So we gotta have to do this a little bit more often, hopefully.
Yes. Thanks, Perry. Appreciate it.
Thank you, as always.
Okay. All right, and that does it for this episode of Japan on Film. JapanOnFilm.com is the website. We're Japan on Film on Twitter and Instagram. Make sure you like and subscribe. And thanks so much for listening. Thanks for watching. And we will see you next time. The Japan on Film podcast is produced by me, Perry Constantine, in conjunction with the We Made This podcast network. Visit JapanOnFilm.com for show notes, episodes, merchandise, and information about being a guest yourself. You can also reach out to me on the website's contact form if you have questions or comments about Japanese movies or the show itself. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at JapanOnFilm. If you'd like to help support the show, you can donate at JapanOnFilm.com, WeMadeThisNetwork.com, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find links with information about each guest and join the discussion on the We Made This Discord in the show notes of each episode. And now, listen to hear what's coming up next on the We Made This Network.
Do you believe in the existence of X-Files podcasts? Then the truth is in here. I'm Tony.
I'm Sarah.
I'm Carl.
And I'm Armor Drake.
And the X-Cast is devoted to all things X-Files. such as in-depth episode discussions.
I love the 8th season being like, no, you're saying goodbye. And that's something pop culture doesn't do enough.
Interviews with many of the cast and crew from the show.
I had to audition repeatedly. I mean, I went in, I read for Chris and Frank. First I read for the casting director, Rick. And then I made it past that hurdle and read for Chris and Frank. Had a lovely meeting with them.
And special roundtable chats, commentaries, and fun bonus episodes.
But this is great. Mulder just having no idea what's going on.
On this beautiful boat with people not really speaking English.
You can find us on the We Made This podcast network, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all good podcast players.
We'll see you in the basement. But until then,
trust
no
one.